Both sides speaking out tonight over efforts by the Grand Chute Town Board to fire its town administrator. All of this as we learn new details about a Department of Justice investigation into a town supervisor launched more than a year ago. Jason Zimmerman was at the meeting, which just wrapped up. He's live for us in Grand Chute. Jason.
Cammy, the town board spent 2.5 hours in closed session tonight discussing their legal strategy in terms of potentially firing town administrator Jim March, who has held that position for the past 15 years. This is the third such meeting in just 1 week, with the town chairman saying previously that he believes it is time to start from scratch. Now, the issue led to a packed annual town meeting with many people speaking out on both sides, some supporting March and others the town board. For March's contract to be terminated, a 2/3 vote is required.
I don't think that Grand Chute is going to benefit from letting Mr. March go. I don't want to pay for a lawyer so they can have what they want.
We voted this town board in. The majority of the people in town voted these people in. It's now, how many years later, and they still are not allowed to do their job because the finger pointing won't stop.
All of this happening as Town Supervisor Ron Wolf has been the focus of an ongoing Department of Justice investigation. The DOJ has not released many details, and the search warrants executed in this case have been sealed by an Outagamie County judge. However, we have obtained a copy of a letter sent to the State Attorney General last December from Supervisor Jeff Ings. In that letter, Ings questions the status of the investigation, which he says started in September of 2021. Ings also asked whether any charges have been filed or are being considered against Supervisor Wolf. An agent for the DOJ responded saying in January to Ings, quote, "I confirm the investigation continues to be open and ongoing. Additional criminal investigative activities occurred as recent as last month in connection with related parties." End quote. Supporters of March say that he's a witness in the DOJ investigation, but the town chair denies that that has anything to do with the discussion taking place right now.
The town board understands and appreciates the need for the transparency. Legal counsel has advised against public statements, discussions, and discourse, etc., while the town board continues its discussions with legal counsel. The town board will fully inform the public as to the action it takes at the appropriate time.
It was represented that it is the town chairman's right to appoint a new administrator. It is not. And I will stand by that. It just simply is not. Legally speaking, it's not.
There was no action taken by the board after tonight's closed session. I'm told that attorneys for both the town and for the administrator are meeting and discussing options, and that is expected to continue in the days to come. Reporting live in Grand Chute, Jason Zimmerman, Action 2 News.